Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to be taking a look at what I feel people will find the most interesting and important changes that came with this update. Obviously, the Epic Quest came out with this update, so I'll briefly be looking at that and also giving you some tips on how to best finish it. Aside from that, I'll also be showing you my initial tests of the characters in both PvE and PvP and give you some skill rotation recommendations, as well as some build suggestions. Right off the bat, when you start the Epic Quest, you'll be entered into a prologue where your character that's talking is Sersi. So if you're worried that you started the Sersi side of the Epic Quest, then don't worry about that. That's just the prologue that everyone has to go through. I believe it's around 9 missions total, so it's not too bad. Anyways, after you complete that, you'll end up on this page that you see right here. And from here, you can choose which side of the Epic Quest you want to go to. You have the option of doing Sersi, Ikaris, or Makkari. Based on the quests that people have compiled online, the best options for quests to pick first are initially either Ikaris or Sersi. Since there are no hard stops to their quests, you can complete them in one go through without having to wait on a particular mission or something like that, which is the case for Makkari. So if you want to get those characters upgraded as fast as possible, then pick either Ikaris or Sersi first, and then you can move on to Makkari. Also, if you choose the Ikaris quest, it's advisable that you rank him up to level 70 first, since if you do that and also get his gears up, I believe, I'm not entirely too sure, you'll get bios back, which then you can use to mythic his uniform. So if you do the Ikaris side of the quest first, make sure to get him to level 70 at least, so that you can get those bios for the uniform. If you're wondering what the Deluxe mission has, you get access to Makkari bios as well as shifter bios that are either Sersi or Ikaris. And besides that, you get the coveted artifacts that you can farm daily at a limit of 4. So you can do 4 daily runs, and I believe that each run gives you about 4 to 5 bios of Makkari, as well as a varying number of artifacts and levels, similar to how you would get the Extreme ISOs in the other Deluxe packs. And if you're wondering if you can get the Deluxe pack if you've started the Ikaris or Sersi side of the quests, you definitely can. And it's probably a good idea that you get the Deluxe pack, since you can start getting the bios for Makkari as well as those artifacts. And you can take her into World Boss Ultimate or World Boss Legend to get that potential unlocked, so you can take her to max level. Also, there is some speculation online based on the game files that there could potentially be another Deluxe pack for the other part of the Epic quests that come later on. So just keep that in mind if you're considering getting this one right away. It's just something to think about. Also, if you noticed in the prologue, one of the characters called Crow appears, which is a little bit of an indication that he might be in the next part of the Epic Quest, possibly as a playable character. It's uncertain, though again there is speculation online that he might not be due to the textures on the current character. But then again, maybe he will. I don't know. People don't know. But he does appear in this quest, so there is a potential that he might show up later on. And considering that he is one of the main villains of this Eternal storyline, it is a possibility that he could potentially be the native T2, or possibly even the native T3. Moving on to the uniforms. These are what the uniform options look like for these 3 characters, and all the credit goes to the person that made this infographic, or the people that put it together, I'm not sure. But whoever made it, you know who you are, so yeah, all credit goes to them. But as you can see, the uniform options aren't that great, since the ones that are needed as options are either kind of outdated uniforms or not really that great ones. Before I show you the testing for the Eternals, Wolverine also got some minor changes in this update, including Invincible on his ultimate, where he previously had immunity, I believe. So that is kind of useful in PvE, where you can not really take damage when you're doing something like Null in his very last few health bars. And it's also useful in PvP, since he survives long enough to go into his ultimate at times. More importantly though, Wolverine now has 25% decreased basic damage, which makes him much tougher to take down in PvP and a lot easier to stay alive in PvE. Aside from that, they also kind of fixed his third skill having some hiccups where you couldn't use the skill if the opponent was already in an iframe. So they kind of cleaned that up, and I'll show you what I mean in this next clip. So previously you couldn't use your third skill consistently when the opponent was in an iframe, and now as you can see in this clip, you definitely can. Though it's not really that beneficial if the opponent isn't hitting you. Regardless, you can enter into that counter skill earlier in case there's other damage coming from other sources, or the iframe damage is applied more quickly than Doom's fifth skill. By the way, if you want to get an idea of just how much a difference 25% basic damage decrease does for a character, here is me not even playing Wolverine and having Ebony Maw on my team and Colossus. But as you'll notice, the opponent team also has an Ebony Maw, so those effects kind of cancel out. So essentially, I'm basically just using Wolverine in his leadership that has that little bit of debuff, and Colossus as support. So that mitigation that's coming from this team is basically just that 50% from Colossus as well as the 25% from his passive. Since I'm using a regen, I don't have that additional mitigation, but as you can see, I don't necessarily need it from the Reforged Steel or Authority effect, since the healing is so quick with that high mitigation. Also, if you missed it, I did also tank Doom's ultimate skill, so you can see that this mitigation that's added, or the damage decrease, is going to be a pretty big headache in modes like Timeline, but more specifically Alliance Conquest, where you can't control your character. I was taking a look at the Eternals upgrades and how their stat bumps increase when they're at T3 and Transcendent. Ikaris actually gets a pretty big HP stat bump and damage, and the other characters get pretty good ones as well. I think Sersi probably has the lowest stat bump, but she does do a lot of damage with her kit as is. And surprisingly, I saw that Makkari actually gets a pretty big HP increase considering that she's a speed type. So that's pretty interesting as well. Looking at how the uniforms change the characters, for Ikaris, his skills don't really change too drastically. His fourth have more hits, and his fourth also has a longer hit duration. More importantly is his uniform passive, which gives him 10% chain hit damage and 25% decreased basic damage, which you just saw from Wolverine how much of a difference that makes. So very quickly here you can see that without the uniform, his third skill does 18 hits, and his fourth skill does 25 hits total. With the uniform equipped, the third skill actually does 3 less hits, but does end up doing more damage overall. Whereas the fourth skill lasts much longer and hits 13 more times than without the uniform. In terms of a skill rotation for Ikaris, the one that I found worked the best was to use the third skill and then instantly cancel into your fifth skill, and then wait till he does his kind of roar, and then does the kind of attacks where lines appear, where he's going all over. When you start seeing those lines, you go into your fourth skill. So again, just to clarify, you do 3 cancel, 5 delay cancel till those lines appear, and then stay in your fourth skill. After that, you can just do your 1 and 2 as filler, and it's probably ideal that you finish off with the second skill, since he does do a little bit of a burst lingering damage at the end, and by that time you can go back into the rotation that I mentioned. For my Thanos stage 50 test without an ideal team and without his uniform, I end up finishing with 1 minute and 7 seconds remaining. Oh, and also I'm not using a damage proc. The build that I currently have on him is a CTP of regeneration. Although I do think that he performs better in PvP and is designed for it, if you do want to play him in PvE, he is very proc friendly, and I would think that the most ideal build for him for maximum damage would be something like a CTP of energy. You can see from the time at the top that with the new uniform, so getting that stat bump increase from the uniform itself, as well as the uniform passive and the slight skill changes to 3 and 4, I'm able to complete the same content roughly about 1 minute faster. Once I move over to his quest and get him to T3, I'll show how much of an upgrade that makes, but for now I'm just showing what the characters can do where I currently have them at. I was saying that Ikaris is more dominant in PvP, and you can see that more clearly here. Even at level 70, I'm able to take down Sentry as well as Doom and Silver Surfer. The damage accumulation from his 5th skill coupled with that penetration and then his iframe ignore skill on his 4th makes him pretty lethal in PvP, especially since he's tankier now with that mitigation, the passive healing, and the fact that many of his skills are either iframe, contain damage immunity, or invincible. As I mentioned previously, I'm using a CTP of regen to boost his passive healing, though I am potentially considering using a CTP of destruction since he does have that iframe ignore a lot, and if he doesn't use the 5th, then he's guaranteed to basically one-shot with it with the penetration and the damage proc. The destruction might actually end up being pretty lethal, especially if you can get your hands on Ikaris's artifact, which gives him iframe to all his skills for a set period of time. If you get exceedingly lucky and get the 6-star version of this artifact, it can give you iframe ignore for as much as 9 full seconds. The changes that come with Sersi's uniform are that her tier 2 passive now also gives increased damage versus supervillains and increased damage mitigation or decreased damage taken from supervillains. And as you can see, this applies to all Eternal allies, so that means Ikaris, Makkari, and Hyperion can benefit from this if they're on the team with Sersi. Besides this, her tier 1 passive also got improved, going from 10 seconds uptime for the debuff and 20 seconds downtime during the cooldown to 12 seconds uptime and 18 seconds downtime or the cooldown. So that means that before, this passive was unavailable for at least 10 seconds, and afterwards it's unavailable only for 6 seconds, which makes a pretty massive difference in PvP, where just a few seconds of CC, like freeze, paralysis, or mind control, can be the difference between a win or a loss in the fight. They also changed her 3rd skill, adding in additional healing of 15%, as well as 2 full seconds of paralysis, which makes a pretty massive difference in content like World Boss Ultimate, where you can essentially perma lock down a boss if you combo it with her 4th skill, I believe, which has charm on it as well. Similar to Ikaris, Sersi also got that basic damage received decrease of 30%, which combos really well with that villain damage decrease as well. And she also got a little bit of recovery rate increase, which is helpful with that health recovery on her skill change. But overall, the uniform passive changes aren't as massive as her kit changes. In these clips, you can see the difference in hit count between having no uniform and her newest uniform. So her 3rd skill previously hit for up to 24 times, and her 4th skill hits for up to 23 times. After you equip the new uniform, the 3rd skill hits for 8 additional hits, whereas the 4th skill hits for an additional 5 hits. In terms of rotation for Sersi, you can basically cancel all of the skills almost immediately for her, though you'll likely have to use the 3rd skill to open with, since she does have damage accumulation for damage taken. Since you ideally want to open with a 3rd to get some damage taken, it might be a little bit difficult to use something like a single skill damage proc, i.e. a CTP of energy, since you won't be able to time everything correctly to proc on one skill. So a rage might probably be easier for her, a lot easier to play with, and end up being more consistent damage overall. The 6th skill, or her awakening skill, can basically be insta-cancelled, so a potential rotation that you could do when you have her awakened or transcended is a 3 cancel into your 6, insta-cancel, and then you can kind of rifle off the other skills as you want. The thing that I tried was 4, 5, 2, and then 1. I left the 1st skill for last, since if you don't insta-cancel that, it also has damage afterwards, so you can get max damage by leaving it last, or if you want to use it earlier on and finish with 5, you can stay in that iframe or kind of invincible state and be protected from damage in PvE. If you want to see what the hit count looks like if you pull off a good chain hit rotation, this is the amount of hits you can get if you're attacking a group of enemies. It can go up to as high as 1800 or more. You can see that even with no uniform and no damage proc, she still does really well because of that really high damage accumulation for damage taken. So with no uniform, no damage proc, I'm able to finish stage 50 of Thanos with 1 minute and 21 seconds remaining. When I equip the new uniform, I'm able to complete the same content 53 seconds faster. And that's partially due to the fact that she gets increased damage from the uniform stat bump there, as well as the fact that she does also have more hits and damage on her skills, but also because she does have that paralysis, which helps her in the first stage of the Thanos fight, where I can basically keep him locked down for a period of time till I can get him down to that second phase part. On the PvP side, even though she doesn't have any iframe ignore, which is kind of a staple for most top PvP characters at this point, much of her skills, like her 5th, have long iframes and a lot of damage, especially when she does her 3rd skill as well to get that damage accumulation, and she can take out some big revive metas even with no damage proc when that happens. The lingering damage on her 4th skill is also pretty deadly, since it can still heavily damage opponents even after she dies. I'm currently using an obelisk with guard break immunity and I believe 3 seconds of invincible, so if you were to use something like CTP authority that also has that damage accumulation, though it could conflict with the 3rd skill, it should still perform fairly well, especially if you can get it reforged with that extra mitigation. If you purely want her as support, then you could also go with Insight, but I think she has a lot more value now as a standalone character, so using something even like a CTP of Destruction to give her some added penetration and more burst damage could also be very effective. Speaking of Destruction, that's one CTP that I'm considering actually trying out, since she does seem pretty good in PvE, and I can kind of make her work as a hybrid by using Destruction, since I can use the damage proc in PvE and the penetration and the damage proc in PvP. And with this new artifact, if you can get this, you can basically use her very similar to Corvus, where if she awakens, she basically gets full advantage of that proc and penetration with her awakening skill, and she could potentially wipe out an entire team. Makkari is the last character that I'm looking at, and possibly the craziest and most surprising from what I've seen in the testing that I did. Her uniform passive only gives her that healing effect, which might not seem that great, but when you use her in PvE content, or even in PvP for that matter of fact, it's very noticeable how helpful that healing is. Similar to Sersi's uniform though, the main changes to Makkari come with her skill changes more so than her uniform passive. Her 3rd skill is basically the only skill that really changes with and without the uniform, but the skill itself changes so drastically between the 2 uniforms that it makes a very noticeable difference in PvE and PvP. The skill description in itself doesn't really change between the 2 skills when you view them, but keep note of the 3rd skill icon tags on the right side there. The 3rd skill on the new uniform has additional tags which give her iframe ignore as well as super guard break. These 2 tags alone on this skill, with the hit count that changes on it as well, which I'll show in a clip in a second here, make a massive difference in PvP, since you can keep the opponent almost permanently locked down while she essentially one-shots them. So the hit count with no uniform is 25 hits total, and then with the uniform equipped, the number of hits on the 3rd skill is almost 3 times as much, going up to 67 hits or 42 additional hits. In terms of skill rotations, I was messing around a bit, and I'm pretty sure she's pretty proc friendly, though I couldn't actually test that. But you can delay cancel the 3rd skill after the camera shifts and she goes into her fast attacks. You can insta-cancel the 4th and go into your 5th. So the rotation that you want to use for her is essentially 3 delay cancel 4, cancel 5. If you start your rotation when your proc is ending for something like a CTP of energy, you can do 3 delay cancel 2 and then a little bit of delay cancel 4 insta cancel 5 and get that extra added damage from the second skill's lingering effects. Similar to Sersi, her 6th skill, or the Awakening, is also insta-cancelable, so if you have that skill unlocked, the rotation would be something like a 3 delay cancel 6, cancel 4, cancel 5. And as you can see from the number of hits, I'm sure the damage will be absolutely mental. The 5th does have a proc that you can transfer to other skills, so I was messing around with possible rotation where you can pass that proc onto the 3rd skill. Then if you have a damage proc CTP like an energy, you can double proc on it, but unfortunately you can't do a rotation like the one I mentioned before, because if you use the 2 or the 4th skill, the lingering damage from that will immediately activate the proc on those skills, as opposed to being able to transfer it on the 3rd skill. I can't say for sure which rotation will be better yet, but you can also potentially do something like a 6, cancel 5, cancel 3, and get a massive proc on the 3rd skill while that Awakening skill is up. Either way, I think she's going to be turning heads in PvE like Moonstone did with the massive burst damage that she has. Here is what a potential hit count looks like versus a mob of enemies when you do that delay cancel 3 into 6, cancel 2, delay cancel into 4, cancel 5. As you can see, like Sersi, she can do a high number of hits in a short amount of time, going as high up as 1800 or more depending on the number of opponents that you have. If you want to get an idea of just how good Makkari is currently performing in PvE, I don't have anything equipped on my current Makkari build. I don't have any Uru, I don't have any custom gear, and in this initial test, even no uniform, no ISO, I don't have anything equipped. And as you can see on screen, I don't even have her potential unlocked, so I couldn't take her past level 60, so the only thing that I have is level 20 gears. Using the same rotation that I mentioned in the previous clip in the training area, I'm able to complete stage 50 of Thanos with 1 minute and 9 seconds remaining. Keep in mind that this was roughly where I was at with Ikaris and Sersi, who have full builds and are at level 70 with level 25 gears. Then after equipping her uniform, I'm able to finish with 2 minutes and 13 seconds remaining, which is 1 minute and 4 seconds faster than my previous run. To put it into perspective, that's the same finish time as my Sersi with a full build, level 25 gears, and at level 70 with a mythic uniform. The current uniform that I had equipped on Makkari isn't even mythic yet. In fact, it wasn't even ranked up at all. If that wasn't enough to convince you how good this character is, she's also really strong in PvP content. She basically almost always goes into the fight with her 3rd skill, which, like I mentioned before, if you have the uniform, it has that super guard break, which essentially keeps a character locked down and head rocking or head stunned till she can basically finish them off with the same skill. This skill works really well in conjunction with her passive that gives her native penetration, so if an opponent goes into their invincible, she can still pretty much go through the invincible and kill them before they go into their other skills. The fact that she's taking down native tier 2 and T3 characters with no supports at level 60 with no build is absolutely wild to me. Although I suspect that a lot of people will utilize her with a PvE build, if you want to use her in PvP, I think something like a CTP of Authority will likely be the most effective for her, since it gives her that added mitigation and the invincible if she gets knocked out of her iframes. You can even use a CTP of Regen because her health pool gets increased so much and she frequently spams her 3rd skill to get even more healing. And since she's so similar to Quicksilver, you could also probably go with a Greed and get a little bit of a hybrid build where you could use her in things like Dispatch and even PvE content and still be dominant in PvP and take down damage types that counter her like combat quicker because of that proc from the Greed. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to go with. I'm kind of playing with the idea between Authority and Greed. Also, if you are able to get her artifact, it might not be as great as the Ikaris one that lets you iframe for a set period of time, or the revive like the one for Sersi, but the burst damage in combo with the artifact should essentially give you a one-shot in PvP. And in Danger Room Extreme, I suspect that she'll be the #1 character for clearing the bosses in the shortest amount of time, since this artifact will increase her burst damage even more, and because the villains in there are mostly blast types, she gets that type advantage, so the rate that she's going to take out the bosses is just going to be absolutely mental. Anyways, that does it for the overview of the update. I feel like all 3 characters are actually really strong in different content. Ikaris is going to be dominant in PvP. I believe that Sersi's probably going to be a little bit of a mix of the two, and Makkari is likely going to dominate in PvE, but I feel like she's going to do really well in PvP as well. I can't wait to test them when they're at max build, but that's going to be in a couple of days. Let me know what your impressions of the update are so far in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing so I can make more content like this. Thanks for your time and watching, but the video is now over.